two different topics. So this model 2 is about introduction to your iPaaS. So as I described earlier, SAP Integration Suite provides an bundled package of services which acts as a holistically as an integration platform as a service. So inside that, we covered multiple services. We actually see in a couple of services as a real-time example, like we have checked our cloud platform integration with some example how to create an iFlow and how to start with creation of some adapter. Basically, we have seen HTTP adapter, some basics, and OData adapter, how to consume the data using HTTP adapter. So we just gone through that cycle. So then we touched upon how BTP has been positioned in the market. So for an intelligent enterprise. So in BTP, there are multiple components in terms of technology. In the technology, integration plays a major role in order to make an automated solution-driven approach. And also, this solves the problem for multiple industries, and how we also see in a holistic way how each and every solution is bringing a good real use case to solve a bigger enterprise problem. So then coming back to integration suite in specific, like when an enterprise chooses an SAP cloud platform or SAP BTP integration suite as an integration strategy, going forward, we touched upon like how they can use predefined solution, then open integration solution, then holistic integration with multiple system that actually give analytics center that can build upon SAP, then AI-driven integration using integration advisor, and all those features are available with integration suite. We touched upon all those topics, and also like this complex, especially your process integration, API integration, even event integration and data integration. So all this is now bundled with a holistic package called integration suite. How these are tied up with the various services we touched upon that one as well. So now coming back to what are the various mechanisms that you can actually connect to a system using integration suite. Like you can actually make a third-party integration, and you can make us API-driven integrations using API management and all those things we actually continuously touched upon. Back to your methodology, like your integration solution advisor methodology, where ISAM plays a major role to design enterprise-wide integration architecture. With ISAM, you will be creating a request, and this request will, it's just like your change request, like I want to solve an end-to-end solution, end-to-end problem. We're using a solution integration solution strategy that you will be using an ISAM. What are the components that you can put from your integration suite? How that integration suite can orchestrate and give the best solution out of it. ISAM will solve the purpose. So basically, how ISAM is exposed to third-party integration technology. Like, so let's take an example on in our use cases. Like if I create a template, now SAP also open up a request to access through their platform, SAP Cloud Platform or SAP Business Technology BTP Platform. And through that, you can even go through the existing template and you can provide a suggestion, or you can learn more about it and you can incorporate in your existing organization. And with ISAM, you can actually get some kind of a reusable template, and those templates can be leveraged in your future integration advisor strategy. Okay, and coming back to your ISAM cycle, so like first as an enterprise, how do I actually like assess my integration, right? So let's take an example. My problem is to bring inventory visibility. So it's just that's my use case, end-to-end use case. If I want to achieve inventory visibility as my problem, integration plays a major role. So in that case, I need to assess my integration strategy. And if I choose that one, like I have multiple connected platforms, I might have different system in my ecosystem. How do I actually see those ecosystem? If I see those ecosystem, the next thing will be I will be weighing that whether I have a defined or prepackaged integration that are available to make use of them and to reduce my entire build time. So that is another one you'll be talking about. So then when we do integration, our main strategy would be to have integration best practices So those best practices are nothing but offering of our observability, end-to-end traceability, and actually to trace the entire integration flow with detailed error logs or your detailed data flow, and that can also help you to grow with your future data analytics purposes. And then coming back to your practice empowerment, like once I have this all this one, like how do I plan to implement this solution in my space? So that's what we touched upon. Like let's take all if I have assessed my integration strategy, then I have found some prepackaged hybrids integration model with the integration platform. Then if I if I define my complete best practices, how do I enable them to empower this one to deliver a robust integration? So ISAM provides those all this methodology within. So this is a kind of a sample screen that I think we rendered through that one and we see that one and we can even create a request, but the detailed information will be accessed if you have a higher version of your cockpit information. So coming back to your positioning of your integration suite from a more technical perspective, integration suites has these core capabilities, which are your cloud integration, API management, and integration assessment, which is nothing but your so then your integration advisor, trading partner management, and open connectors. These are the four capabilities that will solve holistic of industry and these are the various capabilities offering services within your integration suite that you can see in your landing page. So go to my landing page, I can see everything from here. So in our actually current cockpit also, like initially as I mentioned, we have done this cloud integration activation, API management activation, integration advisor to see minimal content order and trading partner management, open connectors, integration assessment as well as your migration assessment. So like these are the major content that you actually might see from this system. So that is your module 3. So already in my first session and second session, just I have walked through about the basics, something about a landing page on API management and some basics on the API management. But in this session, we will just go in detail about API management and then we can actually have created with some APIs and we can apply some policies out of API and we can see how those policies are going to help to solve the industry problem when it comes to the cloud solution. So in this module 3, we are going to cover about what is API management. So we have seen as just a brief about it, but we will go in depth in the entire module and we will describe the technology behind that in API management and what is the use of API provider and how do we create API provider. So we actually seen creating API provider only for 2 options, but in general, when you have an enterprise edition, you will have 4 to 5 options. I can show you that one, like how that resembles, and actually then from there we can see in real world how that is connected. So then with the API provider, you can actually go ahead and create your API. Once you have the APIs, so you will have your proxy endpoints. So once the proxies are available, then you can go ahead and apply some policies to make your APIs more robust or to more have a gateway centralized microservice architecture. So then coming back to API again. So like you can create a bundle of API as a product. So that is even possible. So how do I create a product using API management? So what is the purpose of creating a product? We can talk in detail and see how we can create a product also. So then let's take an example like in your earlier integration tools, example your PIPO or it could be your any systems, access systems. Monitoring plays a major role. So let's take in PIPO, you'll go to monitor message and you'll monitor some messages over there. But in case of cloud, so I understand like every SaaS has its own monitoring capability, but how API management has some monitoring capability. So whether I will get the detail log information or I'll just see the traffic level information or just success and failures, we can actually see those logging and monitoring. And also we can see the monetizing of this one. So in general, in some industries, whenever some consumer expose some API, they will monetize to some certain business unit. So we can see those options also. How do you monetize those API calls to a particular business unit so that your business unit not get charged on that level? So we can see all those options in the coming days, especially on the API management. We can go in depth on those things. So what is API management? In an integration strategy for an intelligent enterprise, let's take an example. You choose your integration suite as your enterprise grade integration platform. And if you want to connect your SAP system, SAP's data to other system, like in your ecosystem, you might have other systems. You might have your legacy, you might have your system which is lying on your third party and cloud, and you might have other system which is lying on your digital front. So many other different combinations, right? Like I might have different purposes and different combination of data that I need to serve to my consumer. So if I want to serve that data to my consumer, how do I expose that? Yeah. So how do I expose the data? So the one option is to expose as an API, and other option is to expose as through integration service. So, but let's check if I open up with integration service, since it's in the cloud, people will actually see for a higher level security mechanism. So if I consider about a higher level security mechanism on some throttling effort within API management, within the API, whatever API that actually I'm going to expose, your API management plays a major role over there. So in that case, you can even have your API management activated. As an enterprise, you can activate your API management in your integration suite, and you can position your API management closer to your backend system with that. And also with a new feature what SAP is offering, you can make your entire cloud strategy as your private cloud within your same DNC. That is another one interesting factor that SAP is now offering. So when it comes to DNZ side, right, like I can protect my entire system within my same IP range so that my data will not be completely exposed to the outside world. I have the security level at the highest rate. So that's a major criteria about from the platform side. So now whenever you create an API, let's take an example. I'm creating I'm exposing a OData API. So because you might actually expose an API, you might expose the same API with some kind of another version. Okay, so let's take, it could be a version one as an API, whatever you're exposing. Another version you might expose that API that could be V2. So as an industry best practice, any cloud offering or any system which consume that API, they will expect an API to be exposed in a different version. The reason behind that, right? Like I have an API for sales order with some defined with I can actually have an API which is connected to my CDS view, and for my requirement I am going ahead and actually extending that CDS view in total. But this could actually impact on the consumer side on your new data structure. In that case, like you cannot directly go ahead and ask the consumer to introduce new field and you just rely on that one. So now is any consumer will have a kind of a different versioning system. So they will ask you whether you will go for a V1 or V2. But we will actually see the versioning system in detail when it comes to API management, how you can version that one and how you can version those paths and you can control that. But whenever you enter into an API management in general, you have this entire life cycle. Example, right? Like starting from your API, so you will be actually first and foremost thing, you will be starting from discovery or discover API packages, then go to your API designer, building the API, publishing the API, analyzing the failure on the API, and consuming that API and monetizing those API. This is the entire life cycle of an API, and each and every API has to follow a different versioning because whenever, as I mentioned, so those API versioning plays a key role and major role in your day in day out consumer system. So coming back to your digital front, especially on the digital apps. how do you actually get an API? So like, let's take an example. You take an example of your sales order system, sales order API, right? Sales order API will be consumed by two different partners. Either it could be your or it could be your app which are actually used in your wholesale system. So if you are in your supply chain industry. So in that case, how do I make that available in different versions? That plays a major role. And an API supports another capability for real-time API integration. Example, in case of digital front, they expect some response immediately, not like the previous the SAP used to be always a batch mode earlier. Now with the new S4 data and with this new S4 model, people expect actually the API to any transaction that is happening within SAP with a near real time. So that can be offered through APIs. Okay, and another one is something like microservice architecture. So bundling multiple API into a single API from Odata service through your S4 system and expose that API with your deep entity is another option. People are preferred nowadays so that people can actually consume a particular entity set of data through that service and they can actually use other services for other functionality. So microservices architecture is something bundle all the services and to make everything as a single API. And that also enables to go ahead with your robust DevOps model in the future. Yeah. So in API management, we have different components as I showed you earlier. Let me show that one more time. If I go to API management here, the design configure your APIs. You have your API proxies, API provider certificate, and key value map. So API provider is always your start. It always is going to be a starting point because whenever you want to create any proxy or a product, you need to have a provider. So as we see in an option like, let's take an example in this one. So this is your API for your S4 system, which connects two different proxy types. One is Cypress Internet. It could be your cloud connector. Here it could be your cloud connector. It could be your open connector. Okay. So, and it could be your cloud integration for accessing this entire component. These are the various four proxy type, like or your type of connection that I can actually create with your API provider. But in our version, whenever you go ahead and create those APIs, we have only two options because this is a kind of a older version of BTP API management component. It does not have all four versions. So it brought so promises cloud integration also you can give like this directly. And here you can give your client ID and client secret. And this one on premises, we do not have a S4 system on premise. We are just using internet S4 system as of now. So like a cloud S4 system, so that we choose as internet. And if I have any of the open connector, so in general, open connectors are nothing but those are connectors which, let's take an example, I want to expose an AWS API from through open connector. So on this API can be consumed in your CPI also directly, and also it can be consumed in your third-party system also. So by doing that, so in open connectors, you can even have another operation. Let's take an example. If you want to post the data through box system by your integration platform, so you can use this API management to you convert that one to as a proxy endpoint, and you can consume that one as in your adapter too. So if you do that option, then we get all these things here. So open connector as a separate SaaS solution. I'll see if I can get that licensing as much as possible. Right? But yeah, in general, like we created for this one as well as this one, and your on-premise is not available and open connector is not available. So these are the four different options of your open connect, like API provider that you can connect and you can actually make the connection. So coming back to your components, let's see if I have an option to create a product. General, they used to have a separate tab as products here, but I don't see that one here. You have for API designer to create an API designer, not for product. Because if you onboard yourself or in your trial account with API management, you get by default APIs for API proxy creation and your product for product creation. And even there is an option called application. You can even bundle multiple products into an application too, and you will have policy, the same thing, policy template. But with integration suite, some of the options are restricted as of like, and actually like most of the SAP, I think SAP has realized that most of the customers are going ahead with only API proxy and with a limited option of creating an API product. But I will just walk through the concept of API product also. So API product is nothing but actually, let's take an example. I want to do a supply chain transaction. In order to do a supply chain transaction, I might actually need order creation and purchase. It could be a sales order creation, purchase order creation, and your invoice creation, and also your inventory management. So everything I can bundle this as a product, and I can publish that product whenever any consumer consume that product. I can share that key and make a handshake of that key with other. I'll share the key whenever the API product has been hit by the consumer through an URL. So the key stands as your main authenticator to authenticate the product and consume the relevant API from the product. Okay, so and application is something like if I have a bundled multiple products. So in this example, if I have a product and if I have bundled multiple product and I can create API application where you can expose you have your connection to multiple product with multiple microservice architecture. Everything can be exposed as a single application, and those application can be viewed with a robust view. This is a major thing that SAP used to have in the neo world, but in the cloud foundry I never seen that option when it launches with integration suite. But when you have a standalone API management as a service, so you will have that option of integration, product and application that is somehow now completely taken off. And entry, so what happened like, so whenever you register up to the product and SAP asks you directly whether I can actually make that registration into your API business hub, which is nothing but your ap.sap.com. So this is a business accelerator hub. So that's the SAP is registered by your product. They can offer you an option to register your product into that hub so that other consumer can easily use that one. So that's only one of the options they used to offer in when you have a standalone cloud foundry services, but integration suite, some of the options are now restricted. So I think we see in detail about the creation of an API provider. Okay, so and yeah, so whenever you create a provider, I think so you might know the basic detail of host and your proxy type that I have explained you with multiple proxy type, whether it could be internet or it could be your actually cloud connector, it could be your CPI, or it could be your on-premise system. Okay, so and also I can actually show another option. I'm not sure whether that is available now, but yeah. So here, whenever you choose an option of S4, right, like you can even actually make a discover mode and you can find that API too. So let's take an example. I want to discover an API from my API. That is also possible. So like generally, if you create your business hub as your one of the API provider, you can even discover multiple APIs and you can select and you can just reuse that API here. So that option also possible, but this need a key from SAP to handshake and set this credentials over here. So that you will be creating as part of your internet connection. So that key is needed because whenever you open your business hub, so this is your business hub, you need to log into business hub with your credential, login credential. So let's take an example. You can use my credential, whatever credential that has been shared for your BTP as well. But that also requires a key to handshake that business hub system with your API management so that the connection will be seamless. So with that option also, you can go ahead and create your API and using the Discover. So then coming back to your another option of how to start this creation of this API, like I think we started creation of the provider, and then once the provider is created, then actually we have seen some basic example too in that area. So now this is what actually once a service is activated from your S4 system. So this is your S4 maintain transaction screen where you can actually go ahead and see which services are activated and you can even consume those services directly. Okay, so and you can actually do this. So now we have done the basic stuff on the API management. If somebody has any clarification, I can even create one more time and show it to you how to create an API.
Hey, You know, ZaranTech now offers SAP corporate training. That's right. Train your workforce in SAP with our comprehensive program. We offer customized courses, certified trainers, and hands-on labs for both individuals and businesses. Our standout features? Bespoke training, fully configured servers for practice, in-house materials, and a dedicated LMS. Plus, get session recordings and 24/7 support. From functional to technical modules, we have got it all. Choose ZaranTech for SAP training and watch your team excel. Learn, upskill, succeed with ZaranTech.
Sorry, I was just wondering, you were saying about exposing APIs for people to consume. So you can group them, you can either expose them at an individual API level, or you can group them together into, is it products?
Yes.
Which you'll then just say, so if you've got sales products or whatever with sales orders and various things, and you would then expose that so that people can start developing with it and using their service. So in your experience, when you group the APIs together, how do they tend to get grouped? Is it by a sort of SAP modular grouping or a business work stream, or
mostly by business work stream? So not by SAP modular, mostly by the business work stream.
Okay, that sounds good. And what's the benefits of grouping it? Is it just for easier management, or are there sort of security?
That's for easier management, and also with that one, let's take an example with the business work stream. Any business work stream want to tie up with higher level of security, and they can actually tie up the access app key with the product, and that key can be used only by a specific subscriber. So when you have a product, and your product will have multiple subscribers. So generally, any business work stream, right? Like they want to limit their product only for their usage. They don't want to others to access the product. They will add more layer of security, and they tied that to your monetizing capacity. So like you have a monetizing, right? I can actually even monetize that API product. One, like if I am a business owner in an organization, I will ask the team to create a product for my business need and tie that to my monetizing thing. I will pay directly to that API product consumption. I don't want anyone. I'll also have the visibility how many subscribers are using my APIs.
That sounds great. Can APIs be shared across multiple products? Can they be grouped into more than one products?
Yes. That is even possible.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Because it brings more governance in general. So that's a major thing with the API product.
It sounds really helpful. I think it's probably the way that we're going. So, yeah, thanks.
So now I think we talked about creating a REST API. Let me check if some REST API with some documentation, if I find, we can create those API also. And actually with S4HANA, we can check whether those API can be consumed. Service API. I don't have an API reference, but I don't have exact API path for a service. Yeah, this could be an example. But this is in Ariba. So yes. Yeah.
So when we will work for any real-time environment, and so at that time, this API and everything will be given by the backend team or we have to refer it from this API.sap.com.
Everything will be given by backend team. So like what will happen is a REST. Yeah. So go ahead.
No, I'm just asking this all the details, and for REST API, I could say there are all the file YML and every configuration path, everything has been uploaded here in this api.sap.com. So that is by SAP only for practices purpose, or means who has been control these things?
So let's take an example. You are getting a requirement of create a invoice document, right? Like, but first and foremost thing, any developer will go and check whether this API is available as out of the box capability. So let's take an example. When you go for a greenfield implementation, so they will try to use as much as possible from the out of the box solution. So let's take an example. I don't have access to any of my SAP system. How do I find out which APIs are available from the out of the box? So you can actually type this one in your business accelerator, and you can find out which are out of the box APIs or Orida service. It could be a Orida service, or it could be a REST, or it could be a SOAP. And then you can plan your strategy in such a way which one for your best business use case, right? Like you can see where you can, whether you want to use API as part of your API management or your part of your SAP integration. And also you can even do a deep dive into that also. Like let's take an example. If I see that invoice document, like I can even see this documentation and I can find out what is the defined structure, what is a structure that is SAP is offering as part of my out of the box solution, right? Like where I need to go and extend. So this will give you a fair idea to everyone. So to business as well as to the developer, what level of effort needed to do the entire build. So this will mostly do to your planning stage. This business API hub or a business accelerator hub plays a major role in planning so much requirement to understand what is available out of the box and how do we consume this API. So if it is a standard API, like it's out of the box, how do we go and consume? Or like if I want to do an extension, where do I do from S4 side? Yeah, I don't find any realistic API, but actually I can just create some kind of a dummy API. But in real world, you will be using some of the REST API when you use system like car and some system like MDG. They will have lot of API that are exposed through REST. And those APIs you can consume or you can create as a REST API and you can consume in your API. But the functionality will be similar. There will not be any difference out of it. But mostly like it is used in systems like car and MDG. Those API has many response system.
So I may have been sold a little bit by some SAP marketing programs, but I understand that when you migrate existing integrations from PO across to Integration Suite, there's functionality in place, I guess, from Solution Advisor methodology to recommend potential integration patterns and AP. Well, does it recommend APIs to you as well as possible options?
Yes, it actually recommends. It actually recommends your possible integrations as solutions. It can actually, let's take in PO, if you're doing some with a EDI, then it will actually propose integration advisor as one of the solution. And if you use any database connectivity with PO, then it will actually propose CPIDS. So it will propose multiple integration options, and from there you can do all those integrations.
Great. And similarly, yeah, if we have a new requirement to integrate to put into Integration Suite, and we'd fill in the ISAM questionnaire, whatever, to methodology on the pattern, it would do the same thing, would it? And potentially suggest APIs that we might want to use, although obviously we'd need to do our due diligence and check that we've got the right ones, and we might want to choose a different one.
Yeah, I would say 70% ISAM would be correct, but 30% we have to put because ISAM is just proposal, right, like for the SaaS solution. But as an architect, we have the architectural team as an enterprise team need to validate and refine that solution based on the current use case. Because whenever in the olden PO days, all your transaction might be handling through your legacy and safety system, right? On legacy system, right? Like now, when it comes to your business transformation, now your digital transformation, you might want to go as near at real time as possible. Some of the functionality you might have developed in PO with your async mechanism. Now they want that to be a synchronous mechanism. This API, you put your problem, define your problem, and some propose those options how you can improve that design methodology with through APIs and everything.
That sounds really great. Thanks, and thanks for saying the 70%. That's a really good steer, because I guess like anything, it's the information that you feed into a tool, isn't it? That determines the quality of the thing that comes out at the end. Yeah, it sounds really great, but I was just wondering how good it was in practice. But yeah, 70% sounds pretty good. So thank you.
Just for creating a test REST API because I could not find API directly from the business app because same way. But save this guy. I did not implement any policies till now, but I'll show some implementation of policies from short. You can go ahead and deploy your API. This API is deployed right now. Already not found. That means from S4 this API is not available. services is not available. With S4, it's quite difficult. If I have a system like car, it has all those systems with REST. This is how like you will create a REST API. So let's see if there's something like contract availability, inventory availability. So REST API, this way you can create your REST API in your test system. You can even play around the APIs like so. And also you just go to your core system. I think everyone has this core system access through their logon. Pick any of this user from 10. So as I mentioned in that one, right, like go to the transaction. I'll go to this. If you go to the transaction, you can see the services from the maintain screen. Try to, so can you do a say or exercise like go to this transaction on your S4 system. Once you log on to your S4 system, go to /IWF slash maintain service. Go to this transaction, and from this transaction, see what are the OData services that are already activated, and pick up one OData service and try to at least convert that as an API, so that API proxy. At least you will know how to consume an API proxy, create an API proxy, and consume an OData. So since you have the credential handy, come to Postman, use the URL and test with your credential whatever you are using for your logon. Then you can see all the API data. So try this as part of your assessment in like your homework, so that at least you will know how to go to the different transactions. So then I think these are so just I'm just walking through the option one more time, like how to create an API. So once you create a API provider, then this is your bundle of your API provider. So then you can go ahead and start using this. Go to the design mode directly and start using that create option. Use the API provider, which API provider you need. So here in this example, we have chosen the gateway system which is connected. And once you give the discover mode, it brings list of APIs, and you can choose that API and you can click on OK. Then this API will be created and it will be accessed. This is another way that you can actually even connect your S4 system. But in order to connect your S4 system, you need to have a perfect gateway. Gateway should be exposed in such a way to connect to your API management. If you do that option, your entire transaction can come in close with API management, and then that gives you a complete flexibility of creating an API. Okay. So another option is to create through URL. That's what we are using, creating through URL by inputting all the URL information. So and we tried one option of just directly putting the endpoint and doing that option. But there is another way, like whenever you create an API, let's take an example. If you want to consume any your service from your API without that one, right? Like without any API provider, you can even consume that service. Just go here. This similar model you can actually use for other systems too. Just go here, go to monitoring tab, copy this URL directly. Paste this one. You can directly even create this one. Okay, so let's take an example. If you have a third-party API where you cannot create as API provider in that case, SAP even support an option in that case how to create a API out of give us rest, create, save, and password. Let's use the same password what we use for API. For somebody, yeah. This is something you're getting from CPI. So even you can use this way, you can connect all your third-party APIs and you can do all your operations seamlessly. This is another option of using the API management through URL. So we talked about actually how to create an API using URL. So then also we talked about that one. Then API designer. So this is to develop a contract. So like as I told earlier, like if you have any contract available, open ap.sap.com. Go to Swagger. You can download any API open contract and click on create API designer. That will create an API designer here. So like this will bring all your contract. So this is a way that you can create your API designer and have this API designer published for the developer to use. And once you create your API designer, and this will be tied up to your API for resource generation. So whatever resources that you are creating here, and all those things need to be created as a separate endpoint in your API management. Okay, so that's one about it. Let me see how to create that one for you. Let's take an example of sales order one. So once you create an API designer, that also resemble with as your API. You see here, this directly connect to your backend system. Even you can actually change this one to whatever backend that you want to use. Let's take an example. You can select this one and change to Sport2 and your actual API endpoint. So whenever you create any open API with a published document, you can come and modify as part of your connection need, and then you can actually take it forward for your API creation. This is a way that actually you create API designer. From the API designer, we go ahead and extend your API. Before our break, I spoke about API proxy. So API proxies are a type of APIs, which let's take an example. I want to send an alert whenever some throttling is happening, or I want to connect to a system in a looping way or in a different way. I can create an API provider as a separate API and consume that API in my main API. So this is a kind of this will be used in a kind of a object oriented example. It will be used mostly in your very complex requirement where you want to capture some data using not through directly through your proxy, through other API proxy as an entrance. So that is possible. This can be used. Example, right? I want to use a sales order. Select the sales order. This will be connected to a system. Okay, so then you can do a test and you can create the API. But whenever you expose this API, all your connection will not be going through this one. It will be going through this one. So in some customer, what they will do, they will create a API system provider as a API proxy, and they will make all the connection through that API provider. So that through the API proxy, so that actually all their transaction will be completely monitored, and they know what are the exact path they are actually using when they hit the backend. So in that way, they will have a tight control of governance. So that is another way of using API proxy. You have a main proxy of all functionality like sales order, purchase order, and everything. But you have your main API as your system. Example, I create a API with S4 on a host. Just this is my system. I'm not going to use anything. I'll put only slash. So then this is my so you can have an API used for OData connection. Okay, so now whenever you create your API for purchase orders for invoice creation, so like this system I could see only sales orders available. In API management, you can enable the trace like this, and we can even create that API to the API. Any resources can be accessed because this is how we can actually use this one. But yeah, I'm trying to see why this API provider to provider connection is not okay. Somehow this URL is not transforming because so what is happening? The current issue, right? Like my API is like this. Okay, whenever I hit this API, this will go and hit in my backend directly like this. So this URL is not getting transformed. Usually, whenever you hit your thing, this has to go to proxy. Whatever this path you transfer, the same path will be transferred from one API to another API. So now in this one, it's not happening. That's what it is telling 404 not found. But in general, it actually happens in such a way that transform your path from one path to another path, so that actually you can have a common host, but that common host can be used in your multiple API creation, and that can be leveraged across. So that's a general use case that we use to simulate an API and find out how your API provider can be managed in a better way to have multiple proxy connected. Just at least I can walk through some policies, especially quota policy, because that's a traffic management policy. In general, when you go for any API development, the main expectation of API management is to control the traffic. How do we control the traffic through API management that we can see? Click on your pre-flow and you can apply this one, quota policy. But before this one, you might need to understand what is pre-flow and post-flow, where to apply all the concepts. So I'll just show you how to apply. I'll walk through some concepts, then we can parallelly see how we can correlate those things. This is for the incoming request. Whenever I actually apply this request, when it chooses pre-flow, when it chooses incoming request, it will be applied at the pre-flow. When it chooses outgoing response, it will apply at the outgoing response. So I'm choosing as incoming request and I'm clicking on add. Okay. So now this is a policy. We will see in detail what are different options that you have in quota and how you can manage this quota. But before that, like you need to understand how to apply a policy and what section you need to apply these policies. Let's go over those concepts. So what are policies? So policies are nothing but to add-on feature to your API. Especially you can actually when you add a policy, you can improve your security of an API and you can actually have a throttling capacity. You can even have a mediation policy to convert one payload to another payload. And the next one is about having a custom policy, the usage of custom policy, right? Like in case of very complex requirement, like you might even use some kind of a JavaScript or even Python code to decrypt some data that is coming on your traffic and use in your API flow along the way. So that's a main usage of your policies. Okay. So as I explained, right, these are various policies that are available. One is access control policy. Then your access control is nothing but have create a policy to control the particular resources at certain entry. So let's take an example. I'm using sales order API and actually I want to use only get operation of my a underscore sales order. So you can use access control and you can define what resource you need to control that access that can be controlled over there. So then access entity. So next level is something like how many entities you want to give that control. So that can be used for that one. Assign message is something like this is something like I want to assign either header of my whenever I connect to my target system, whether I can use assign message policy, whether if I want to change target headers like your authorization parameter or you can even add some content type. So these are some examples, or you can actually even add some payload whenever you connect to any system. You can even add payload to it. So that's assign message policy. Your basic authentication policy is to verify your basic authentication. That means whenever basic authentication comes, you can authenticate whether it has a relevant credential and move forward. Extract variable is something like in your policy, you will be creating n number of variables. Okay, how do I create a variable? So let's take an example. I before I use extract variable policy, I have a common use case where I can go ahead and consume a system using a service followed policy, and that policy gives me a response in a JSON payload format. Example, your token generation. So this is your token generation thing. If I want to extract this access token inside my API management, I have a requirement or just make a call of whenever before you make a call to your API store system, get the access token of your SAP Cloud Platform and pass it on. So how do you pass it on? So like inside your API management, you can even use the policy called access like extract variable policy. With extract variable policy, you can extract the response which is coming out of it. But before you can wonder like how do I even call that system? So that is something called service callout policy. So once you have a service callout policy, this is nothing but a service callout policy. You can define the same URL, whatever URL that you want to call, and put that URL and make a hit to that system, and that will bring the response in the next step. Once you have the response in the next step, use extract variable and then get the data out of it. And once you have the variable, then you can pass it to your backend system with some additional header parameter. It could be a header parameter or it could be your payload also. You can set it. So this is just a common example of requirement that we come across with extract variable because this is something like within API management also I can do orchestration by calling multiple policy and I can do the connections. So then invalidate cache. So this policy plays a major role. Let's take an example. I have a requirement of creating a purchase order. But in your real world, before you create a purchase order, you need to make a call to your S4 system through your OData service. And consider you are actually going to use a OData service to create a purchase order. And so whenever you use a OData service for any post methods, it requires a CSRF token. So those CSRF token need to be passed, and those tokens need to be validated by your gateway system. Then this one will be authenticated. Like once I have that one, so once I have my CSRF token, S4 will validate the incoming call, and then it will help you to proceed to create a purchase order. But most of the consumer will be wondering why I have to do two-step of operation. First, because as I told earlier, this requires a CSRF token. Before you go ahead with the step of creating the order with the information along with the token, first you need to get the token. So in order to do that one, you will be making a two calls. First, you will do a get call, and you will do a post call separately. So if you do a get and post separately, so you are actually increasing your number of API calls, and also the consumers are not actually satisfied in making two different calls. So in that case, what we can implement caching mechanism. So before I'll get the payload. Before I get the payload, I go ahead and get I internally using service call out policy. I call my S4 system, get the token, cache the token. Okay, so I will actually put it into my token, and I'll actually set the expiry of the token. So I can actually set the expiry like this token is valid for next 40 minutes. So once the token is expired, so this invalid cache policy will move out of this policy from its database, and it will just completely erase out. So you will be using populate cache, and you will be using invalid cache. Once its invalid cache is done, because every time whenever you actually whenever you look up that value, you will be looking up from the lookup cache, and the lookup cache actually will set the equal timer with invalid cache. And this in general, invalid cache, lookup cache, and populate cache are tied together. So populate cache is for the first time storage. Invalid cache is for the same policy. You will be setting some timer. A lookup cache is something like whenever you make a next call, you will be looking up. So once this is actually the cache is invalidated, then the consumer will get the response 403 forbidden. Then once the 403 forbidden is repeated, then you have to make another call and get the token. So you can actually make the entire orchestration within API manager and cache the token as long as you need. And most over, like it's not about only the caching of the token. Whenever you can actually cache n number of parameters. In this use case, you will be caching both your token as well as your session headers information. Because whenever the gateway trusts you, API consumer, and also order injector, it will actually need a session ID. So whenever you make a query to get the token, the same session ID need to be passed in the second time while we are posting the token.
What sets ZaranTech apart in SAP corporate training? It's our unique blend of expertise and innovation. We offer customized courses tailored to each client's needs, ensuring relevant, targeted learning. Our vast trainer database brings you wisdom from the best in the field. Need resources? Access our extensive training material repository anytime. We are all about measurable results, providing detailed student metrics to track progress. And we don't just teach, we build community. Join our thriving social media network, connecting learners beyond boundaries. With ZaranTech, you are not just training, you are transforming your SAP expertise.
So that what actually populate cache will help you to populate n number of parameters, and lookup cache will help you to get n number of parameters. And once it expired, invalid cache will it will empty all the record, and it will actually throw the exact error back to the consumer, and that process will go ahead and repeat on. So this is this is a kind of a use case with invalid cache example. Another one is something like JavaScript. Even in your API management policies, you can actually use JavaScripts, and you can actually, let's take an example. You are getting a base64 encoded JOT token. So in our use case only, I got a JOT token of base64. So before I do that entire decoding, so I can use a JavaScript to decode entirely. So you can use a JavaScript policy to decode and find out the exact parameters within the claim. So let's take an example. Within the same policy, you need to read the claim of your token. So claim could be your read. So let's take an example. In the same access token, if I go to jot.io, so in this one, let's take an example. You want to segregate this one. You want to read the payload segment of your token because your jot has three segments always. Your header, which is marked in header, and actually you have the payload marked in pink color, and your signature of the complete payload, which is marked in blue color. So in this one, your payload will have the information of your claims detail, which claim is nothing but your scope detail, as well as it will have the information about your what authentication that you have, and also it will have what is a client credential that you have. So let's take an example. As a requirement, you want to read this client credential out of it. So you client ID out of it. You can use a JavaScript policy. JavaScript policy will help you to split that into multiple strings. From the string, you can use again decode policy, decode and find out that object, JSON object. Once you get the JSON object, use extract variable to get the entire thing, that entire thing to a variable using extract variable policy, and you will be getting the particular parameter. So that's what like we can actually use n number of policies to articulate a single solution. So so once you come like hands on to this entire policy, you will be knowing how to use different policy for different. So yeah, coming to JSON and XML, I think this is a mediation policy. So this requirement is something like you have a consumer where your backend is completely SOAP message, but your producer need an API in REST format. You can actually convert your entire SOAP message into a JSON into a JSON format using your normal online converter. And whenever they hit that JSON payload, that will be directly transformed to your XML thing. And whenever you hit the backend, you're going to hit same JSON XML payload and get the response out of it. So this is another one use case with the JSON to XML payload. So then talking about key value map operation. So KVM is another policy that you will be using for some requirement like I am doing a basic authentication. So, but I don't want to authenticate all the users. So you can actually authenticate all the users, but I don't want to authenticate all the users. So in that case, what you will actually use a basic authentication, and with the basic auth, you will read your entire authorization parameter, and you can decode that parameter too. We'll see that basic authentication in detail, as well as followed by all the some of the policy. I'll show you how to use that one, how to see that response, and how we can say about that one. So then you can even have your key value map, right? Like with the basic authentication policy, you will get your authorization header, and from the header, it will decode itself and it will split up into two things, your username and password. And once you get the username, you can go to key value map. Like key value map is nothing but another entry. And go to my API management, you come to key value map. You can create for this, so you can create your key value map as like your API, and you can create a number of users. Like I can use test client, like let's take an example. If I'm using that user as my authentication, you can go to this user ID and you can maintain this user ID as your entry in your KVM. I'll show you it in detail how you can use a combination of KVM, combination of basic authentication, and how to authenticate that policy before you send this one to client. You can even restrict all your authentication in your API management with usage of policies. So that's what like this combination will help you to stop the client in at your API management rather than hitting at your backend. Because some clients check as well as some authorization check that you can even implement at your API management instead of hitting backend, because backend will be busy always. Like in case of S4, it will be processing so many requests. At least we can arrest some requests and we can actually control the traffic with your API management by implementing very test policies. So that's a usage of a key value map. So if it returns correct, then you can even check the password whether my password is correct or not. If both of them are correct, then you can proceed with the next step. Otherwise, you can actually tell the username doesn't match. Okay. Coming back to the message logging policy. So like you might have a requirement, just to be clear, like API management doesn't log any payload like SCPI. If you want to log anything, you need to implement explicit policy, message logging policy. And this message logging policy used to help to log your API header information as well as your payload information. But using this policy will increase your resource utilization. So SAP always recommend and also ask us to be mindful whenever using message logging policy, because this can, even if the throttling effect for this policy is very huge, SAP wants us to restrict our use whenever it is needed. Otherwise this policy is completely kind of you should be used only based on by request or by use case, because this can actually log a number of parameters that can actually spike up the resource utilization in the server. In general, API management is a lightweight component for your integration suite, and this is just a pass through, and we are just implementing the policy to add up some additional authorization and to not to hit my backend very badly by the intruders. So if anybody asks out of that one, we can actually go ahead and implement that one. Otherwise, we can just keep it as it is. So coming back to your OAuth 2.0 policy. So with OAuth 2.0 policy, you can actually create a OAuth 2.0 token also, and you can actually pass it to your client. And you can even use get for getting the token, set for setting the token in some variable. So then Python script, as I explained earlier, so like this is similar to your JavaScript, where if some combination is not achievable through Java, or it takes a lot of coding effort through JavaScript, then you can use Python script, because Python has a number of libraries that can bring your output in a short way. Quota is a policy just I put into an API management. This is something like, let's consider an example. Your S4 has 100 services and you expose 100 services. Okay. So in this case, you cannot allow your consumer hit like 100,000 call in a minute. Your S4 will be bombarded. How do I control my call for hitting my S4? You can implement a two policy, quota or spike arrest. So, but I'll just give the difference between quota and spike arrest a bit later. But I'll just explain what is my quota. So I can put for a particular, you can actually define either by minute, hour, or by day. I need to only pass this many quota limit. Let's take an example. For a minute, I can put only I am allowing 60 calls. Beyond that 60 call, it will actually turn the flag into false. Then it can implement another policy called raise fault. So where you can actually give a custom message to the consumer that you have crossed your API consumption limit. Then it will give too many requests, then come back after 1 minute. So in this way, you can actually limit your quota by either by minute or by some hours or by day. This will actually entirely safeguard your S4 system from your intruder or some attacks. And reset quota is something like if your quota is overwhelmed and it is actually not being, sometimes we have seen SAP API management. This is very, very rare situation where in case like if your quota limit is completely set inbound to the API management, it is very difficult to reset the quota. Then SAP offers the reset quota policy that clears out all the existing quota for that API, and that we can actually bring that API back to normal. That's the usage of your reset quota policy. Then you're coming back to your service follow policy. As I explained, so service follow is something like just think about having a request reply within CPI. The same thing service follow will be used. Just it will act as your adapter to make the HTTP connection to any system internally and get the response. Once you get the response, you can use other policy to set it. Spike arrest is something like So let's take an example. I have a massive request, but this is not controlled through any hours or minutes or seconds. Spikerus is something like it'll actually see for the request in general for a day. So this is completely for a day. When I see a request is crossing more than 43,000 in a day, this API will start throwing an error to the consumer. I see a potential spike. Like so the API can be going. So let me put it in another way. Like your API consumption should be something like 20 or 30 calls that should go per day. But some intruders suddenly get hack of your train system, and they are actually spiking the request from 20 to suddenly to 100 to 200,000. So it will the average traffic monitor for this spike errors is something like it's only 30 at any point of time in a day. But if it sees a spike of around 100 or 200, like it will just stop that API completely. So, which is better or which is not better is based on your use case. So, in general, quota policy has very good use case, but Spikearus has some limitation. But generally, client goes with quota policy than your Spikearus policy. Okay.
Yeah, the traffic ones you mentioned sound really helpful. And do you find that people just normally put them in by default to say that there's to stop? Well, I guess if there's a chance that things might spike or whatever, and to limit a quota, it sounds like a very sensible thing to put in. I understand there's like SAP, there's a way of monitorizing sort of API calls, and SAP charge for this as well. So I guess it's a way to protect yourself from being charged too much.
Yes. The main thing about spike arrest or any traffic management policy, right? Like we have to the main agenda for integration suite or especially on the API management, this acts as a gateway to your backend system. So your backend is your core heart of your enterprise. I don't want my enterprise system to be damaged. I am okay to damage myself by putting all this policy so that I can actually restrict myself when any intruder or any third party attack. So this is the major information about all these policies.
That sounds great. So it sounds like it'd be a sensible thing to just put in the quota and the spike arrest policies automatically and just set them very high, if nothing else, to protect yourself from that. Great. Thanks for explaining. That's really helpful.
Yes, yeah. So then coming back to the SAML assessment policy. So this is another policy where in some use case, let's take an example. I have API management where I need to pass the principal ID from, let's take an example, somebody is creating a sales order through API management S4 system. So whenever they create a sales order, the consumer, your SAP system as part of your audit requirement, as well as part of the compliance, they want to know who created this order. So in order to achieve that one, so what we will do in SAP API management, based on the ID. So let's take an example. This API server will be consumed in your UI application. Assume that UI application can track the user ID, like track the user who's a logon user ID. And from that logon user ID, you can even validate like whether this is a trusted user or not. And if this is a trusted user within your IDP, then you can pass this user ID to your SAML assertion policy. And this SAML assertion will help you to generate a SAML assertion token. And this token will have a number of parameters. And those parameters are nothing but SAML asserted parameters, and those will be trusted in your S4 system. And this will pass as a certificate whenever you make a SAML assertion between your S4 and SAP. From your API management SAP S4, because this is associated to a SAML assertion, and this is considered as a single sign-on. Because somebody is using UI screen, from UI screen they are consuming your API. UI is able to pass a user ID. Once they able to pass a user ID, you are with the API management, you are actually creating your SAML assertion or SAML assertion token, and that established authorized connection to your SAP S4 system, and consider that ID also already exists in your system. Asserted token will be authenticated, and that authenticator will help you to track who created an order in SAP, and that information help you to go and store in your change log. This helps in so many use cases when it comes to SSO implementation or a single sign-on implementation. This helps for the compliance team to find out who created this, like the bulk cash value or a bulk value of an order, and that can help for financial tracking purposes.
I was just wondering about the caching as well, because when you're describing the use of those policies for caching, you were saying it because previously you needed to make a get call, and then in order to get the tokens and what have you before fill the cache before you then do your post. Does using these caching policies, does it reduce the number of API calls at all, or does it just provide a better way of managing it?
It has to reduce the number of API calls for the API consumer, but it will not reduce the number of calls back to the backend, because backend will be anyway making the two calls. But for the API consumer, they want the easy way of connectivity, right? So your caching policy plays a major role in that case. Let's take an example. If there are 100,000 orders has to be created in it. For every time if I go and get the token, then I'm going to make 200,000 API calls. Like in that case, if I use a caching policy, I can reduce the call by half.
That sounds great, because there's a charge per API call, isn't there? SAP charge per API call.
Yes. API calls too. Yes.
So I guess anything we can do to reduce the number of calls is going to be worth doing. Great. Thanks for clarifying that. Yeah. Need to make sure we're on that.
Yes. Yep.